The story begins with a shocking demand. From the heart of Paris, French officials quietly drafted a letter addressed to the government of Burkina Faso. In it, France demanded unrestricted access to Africa's uranium supply, the same uranium that powers nearly three-quarters of France's nuclear energy. For decades, Africa's minerals had been treated as France's birthright. But this time, things would not go as planned. In Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré received the letter. He studied the words, cold and arrogant, designed to remind Burkina Faso of its so-called obligations to the former colonial power. The French government insisted that without a steady flow of uranium, their nuclear plants would face shortages and France's energy security would collapse. In plain words, Paris was saying, "Give us your uranium or suffer the consequences." But Traoré's response would shake the foundations of Europe. He stood before his cabinet and said, "Africa is not a mine for Paris. We are not servants of foreign empires. We are guardians of our own destiny." His words electrified the room. For the first time in decades, an African leader had spoken with such defiance, not in whispers, not in private, but with the fire of sovereignty. And within hours, Paris learned that Traoré had refused their demand outright. The rejection sent shockwaves across Europe. French media erupted with panic. Analysts warned of an energy crisis if Burkina Faso and its Sahel allies cut uranium exports. France, after all, depends on Africa for over 40% of its uranium imports, mostly from Niger and Burkina Faso. Without it, their nuclear plants risk shutting down, their electricity grid vulnerable, their so-called power exposed. But Traoré was not acting alone. Behind the scenes, the alliance of Sahel states Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had been coordinating for months. The message was clear: no more exploitation, no more unequal contracts. Africa will decide where its resources go, and this time, they meant it. Crowds gathered in the streets of Ouagadougou, waving flags, chanting Traoré's name. "Our uranium is ours," they shouted. "Africa is not for sale." For ordinary citizens, this was more than politics. It was about dignity. For too long, uranium had left their soil while poverty remained in their homes. Hospitals lacked electricity, schools lacked funding. Yet France grew rich, boasting of nuclear power and modern cities built on African resources. That injustice had reached its breaking point. Meanwhile, in Paris, French officials scrambled. Emergency meetings were called in the Élysée Palace. Advisors warned President Emmanuel Macron that without Sahel uranium, France could face blackouts within months. But others argued for retaliation, economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, even military pressure. The arrogance of colonial thinking was alive and well, but they had underestimated one thing: the will of Africa to fight back. As the standoff escalated, Traoré delivered a historic speech to the nation and the world. Standing under the blazing sun, with thousands gathered before him, he declared, "France has taken from us for generations our gold, our cotton, our uranium. But today we say no. Burkina Faso will not be a slave. If Paris needs uranium, let them mine their own soil. We will use our resources to power our future, not theirs." The crowd roared in approval. The words spread across Africa like wildfire. Leaders from Mali, Niger, Guinea, and beyond issued statements of solidarity. The African Union, long criticized for silence, found itself forced to take a stand. For the first time in modern history, a united African front against France seemed possible. But this resistance came with risks. Intelligence reports warned that French-backed mercenaries were active in the region. Old colonial tactics resurfaced: covert operations, funding for opposition groups, attempts to destabilize governments that resisted Western control. Traoré knew the dangers, yet he also knew that surrender was not an option. The future of Africa depended on bold defiance. Internationally, the situation grew tense. Russia and China quickly expressed support for Burkina Faso. Russian state media hailed Traoré as a new face of African freedom. Chinese diplomats offered investment in exchange for fair uranium contracts. The West framed it as geopolitical manipulation, but Africans saw something different: choice. For the first time, Africa could choose its partners, instead of being chained to Paris or Washington. Markets reacted violently. The price of uranium spiked overnight, with traders panicking about supply disruptions. Energy companies in Europe warned of skyrocketing costs. France's dependency on Africa had been exposed like never before. What had once been a quiet arrangement, hidden in contracts and secret deals, was now global news. And at the center of it all was a 35-year-old soldier turned president who refused to bow. As weeks passed, the pressure mounted. France deployed more troops to Bassi in neighboring countries, hoping to intimidate. Western media ran stories painting Traoré as reckless, dangerous, even radical. But in Africa, his image only grew stronger. Murals of his face appeared on walls. Songs were written praising his courage. To the youth, Traoré was not just a president, he was a symbol of liberation. Behind closed doors, French corporations begged their government to act. Energy giants, reliant on uranium from Niger and Burkina Faso, feared billions in losses. Lobbyists whispered in European Union halls calling for action. But the reality was simple. France had lost the moral high ground. Colonizers cannot demand what they do not own. The world was watching, and Africa was no longer silent. In Burkina Faso, plans were already in motion. Instead of exporting uranium to Paris at unfair prices, the government announced a new initiative, an African Energy Fund. Revenues from uranium would be invested in local power plants, hospitals, and schools. For the first time, the wealth of the soil would fuel the dreams of its people. Farmers cheered, teachers applauded, children danced in the streets. The chains of dependency were breaking. But Traoré knew this was just the beginning. France would not accept defeat easily. The West would regroup, strategize, and return with new tactics. Yet in that moment, a line had been drawn. Burkina Faso had said no, and the echo of that defiance traveled across deserts and oceans. The question remained, would Africa hold the line? Would other nations follow the example? Or would Paris find new ways to pull the strings? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, Africa was no longer a silent colony. The uranium dispute had ignited something deeper, a fire for freedom that could not be extinguished. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, chants filled the air. Down with exploitation! Long live Africa! Long live Traoré! The people believed, and that belief was more powerful than uranium, more valuable than gold. It was the belief that a continent could rise not as servants, but as sovereigns. France demanded Africa's uranium. Traoré's refusal shocked Paris, but more importantly, it awakened Africa. And history will remember this day, not as a conflict over resources, but as the moment Africa declared, "Our future belongs to us."